Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this new GeneXus webinar, using a low-code platform to speed up your legacy modernization project, by Sergio Bruschi. Sergio Bruschi is VP of USA Operations at GeneXus Consulting. He has been developing applications with GeneXus for over 25 years. He's a founding partner of InStyle Software, an ERP company that focuses in the apparel industry. Sergio joined GeneXus Consulting in 2018 to help GeneXus clients in the USA reach their full potential. At this time, I now present to you Sergio Bruschi.
Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about digital transformation and modernization projects. And we are going to talk briefly about the reasons why we want to engage in digital transformation. What are the drivers of digital transformation? So many times we find ourselves in a situation where our enterprise is being challenged by a startup, and we have no other choice but to engage in the same tactics than these competitors, or we're going to be taken over. There's so many examples, right, of startups taking over enterprises. I'm not going to go into those examples. You probably already know all of them, or most of them, and but you know that this is a real threat to established companies. There's also some other things that push digital transformation, change. So change velocity, things change faster and faster. So how does IT keep up with that change? Processes change, right? Inside our companies, not only change from outside, but also inside. You know, we change the way that we do business. Our users change. So we have younger users, people that are used to their, what, we call native, digital natives. All they know is the apps in their phones and web applications. The UX is a very strong push to modernization. It's not just to make applications pretty, but also to make them easier to use. And easier to use means savings in training and savings in time. Sometimes the push comes from management, right? They need information, and they push us towards digital transformation because they're not getting the information that they want or they need to run their companies. Other things are more technical. We need to be able to show our application in many different formats, whether it's a phone, a tablet, or a desktop. Sometimes we need to integrate with other systems using modern APIs like REST and others. Sometimes we have to integrate with other legacy systems even, and we need tools that allow us to do that in an easy way. Output to Excel, output to graphical formats. So all of these are drivers that push towards digital transformation. So today I'm going to talk about low code and how it impacts this digital transformation. How can we use low code to make this transformation easier? So low code and no code are two terms that are relatively new in the industry. So we used to call tools back in the probably 90s, even before, we had a term called CASE tools, computer-aided software engineering, or and then we even had a lowercase and an uppercase tools. And those were basically tools that would help us build computer systems. And then that kind of went out of fashion, and we had 4GLs. And then 4GLs also went out of fashion, and then we had rapid application development tools. And now we have low code. And all of these things are not exactly the same, but they all have the same goal, which is to accelerate the process of developing software. So I'm not sure who came up with the low code term. Maybe it was Gartner, maybe it was Forrester, maybe it was someone else. But both Gartner and Forrester have their quadrants or analysis reports where they show the different players in this arena. What I'm going to say today about low code, it applies to many of our competitors too. So I'm going to try to provide you as much information as possible so that you can use this information for for your future decisions. So Forrester called us the best low-code tool that you've never heard of. So that is nice. Not all of it is nice, right? That you've never heard of is part is not so nice. So that's what we're doing today, right? We're here to make sure that you have heard about us and that we are the best low-code tool. Well, we agree with that part. So also Gartner has GeneXus in the Magic Quadrants 2 years in a row. And basically, what we want to do with low-code tools is we want to convert complex business systems into simple solutions. So the complexity of business systems has exponentially increased over the last 20 years. Systems used to be much simpler when we were building systems in mainframe computers or even mid-range servers than the solutions that we're building now. The amount of data is much higher. There's a lot more data. The interaction with other systems is there's a lot more of that interaction. The world is basically more complex. The technology is more complex. So even though tools have improved, the complexity of problems has increased exponentially. So how do we create an environment, a development environment, a process, not just tools, but a whole methodology where we can complete development of systems in weeks or months, not in years? Okay, so that's the goal. And in particular, I'm going to describe how does low-code work. And this is specific to GeneXus, but it also applies to all low-code tools. So if you decide to join us and be one of our clients, that's great. If you decide that another low-code tool is the way to go, that's fine too. According to Gartner, about 64%, 65% of the companies by the year 2025 are going to be using low-code tools. I'm not sure of the methodology of how they came up with that number, but that's their estimate. So what does a low-code tool do that is different from a regular programming language like Java or C# or RPG or COBOL or any other of the newer programming languages that we have in the marketplace, like JavaScript, etc. So for one thing, they're targeted. In the case of GeneXus, it's a tool that is built for a particular purpose, and that is database-driven business applications. We're not going to use GeneXus to build something like a compiler or some kind of low-level IC circuit controller. GeneXus is it's a tool that is built with the purpose of creating database-driven business applications. So with that said, though, we have to be flexible. So our tools need to be flexible. They can't just be, they can have just like a one-size-fits-all solution. And some of the tools, I mentioned very briefly, low-code, no-code. So no-code tools are tools where there's no programming, and they're usually used by non-programmers, and there's a new term for them that is called citizen developers. So some expert user in the company using them, and those are very targeted. They're not flexible, but they're very easy to use, very quick, and that's not what we're talking about today. But they have a place in an enterprise, maybe, or in a small business, or wherever it is that those tools, whatever problem they solve, they're very narrow in scope, so they're not flexible. The other thing that low-code tools do is they find patterns. So these patterns are things that repeat over and over, and basically those patterns, we know those patterns, right? Business applications all have security. They present information in grids. They do insert, update, deletes, and views of data. They have filters. They have sorts. They aggregate information. They export to Excel or anything else. They interface with internal and external systems. So we know what these things are. These things repeat over and over in the different scenarios where no matter what our application does, if it's a banking application, insurance, inventory, or any, a restaurant, any industry, we all have to solve all these problems when we're building business applications. So in particular with GeneXus, our approach has been to create the programming is done in what we call a knowledge base, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. Let me just talk for a minute about the company. So the company, we have offices in 3 continents, 5 different countries. We have distributors in over 30 countries. We have 135,000 members, more than 8,700 clients. It's used in more than 50 countries. And we have been in this industry for over 30 years. So we're not a startup. We've been doing this for a long time. We have our roots back in the IBM actually, it was called AS400 back then. And then we moved on to many different platforms. We have customers all over the world that use GeneXus for very complex systems, from banking to insurance to distribution to manufacturing, and some other companies that use GeneXus to build mobile applications that are very simple. So we have a very wide range of uses for our tool. So what is GeneXus? We call it software that makes software. We are not in the industry of, I guess we're in the computer science side of things. We're solving problems, complex problems. We are not in the just screen building, or like where someone that doesn't have a background in programming would be necessarily very effective with our tools. These are tools that are specifically for people that are knowledgeable of database structures, programming structures, but they don't have to know any specific language. Like they don't have to know RPG or COBOL or Java or C# or a combination of all of these, JavaScript, Ajax, et cetera, XML. So we have an approach where the interaction with the end user is very important. So prototyping is a very important aspect of the GeneXus development. So we will have an analyst talk to the users. The users provide the knowledge, which is captured into a knowledge base. And then that knowledge base is used to generate the applications. And those applications are generated as a prototype. The prototype is shared with the end users, which then provide feedback, and the cycle starts all over again. We capture more knowledge, which is then put into the knowledge base. We generate the applications, and then we show the new prototype to the users, etc. And this can be a very quick cycle until we have a working application that can then be moved into a production environment. Sometimes processes are complex, and we have a tool for business process modeling. We are not going to actually talk about the business process modeler today. There's a specific webinar coming up about it in the next few weeks, and you can join us for that one. But it is available to model processes in GeneXus using a specific tool, which is using diagrams, and makes the workflow semi-automatic or automatic. What else do we use in GeneXus? We use dictionaries and global rules and formulas to make, and that's why we call it, again, a knowledge base, as opposed to just programs. All of this knowledge is stored in a SQL Server database, and it can be queried through the API, through the tool, through the EDI, through the IDE, sorry, mix those two terms. Anyway, the important thing is that it's global. So all of these global rules will be triggered throughout the system, and we don't have to program the same rules over and over. They're just part of the knowledge of the application. There is no reference to a specific programming technology. So as technology changes, and believe me, technology does change very quickly, actually, you don't have to be rewriting. You don't have to rewrite your code over and over again. This screen actually comes from a production system that I had worked on myself now it was a Y2K project, so it's been like 20 years since it was programmed, and it was generated as an RPG, IBM or iSeries application. Then it became a Java Windows application, and now it's running as a web application. So all of that in 20 years, never rewritten, just regenerated. We also use drag and drop to create screens, and that's something that a lot of people prefer. I'm not going to be using this feature today. I'll use a different type of screen definition that we also have that is more abstract in GeneXus, but this is available for whoever wants to use this paradigm to define their screens. So one of the important things about GeneXus is and one of the problems that it solves really well is the data binding between what's on what let's say the variables in a program or what we see on the screen and the database. So object-oriented programming has a big problem with the mapping of the object-oriented method, let's say theory, with relational databases. They don't really fit into each other very well. So GeneXus does a really good job of like automatically, when we use what we call attributes, which would be like fields in a table, it automatically binds that to the data in the file, keeping it updated, inserted, modified, delete, etc. Everything automatic without us having to do any extra load, save, etc. So we'll see that during the demo that we'll do later on during this presentation. The other thing that we do support for our clients that are that want to modernize some of their applications, but they still have legacy systems that they want to maintain or improve, we do have RPG and COBOL generators that allow the generation of green screens, and also procedures or processes that are maybe batch in nature, using both our RPG or COBOL generators to do that, or even using our Java or C# generators also. We can build procedures using those two. Some examples of global business rules that are also taken from a real system that is still in production, and you can see the date of that comment there, 03, that's a real comment. That's why I selected it, because I thought, well, this is a great example of how, even though things change, things also stay the same, right? We still have to number documents, automatically assign documents to numbers and stuff like that, or the error rules are still the same rules 20 years later. Doesn't matter if it was a green screen, if it's a mobile device, if it's a web page. So one of the things that that you might notice, though, is that there's just a bunch of rules here, and they all belong to the same program. It doesn't matter what order you write them in. GeneXus will find the correct order to execute them in the final product. So this is a declarative kind of programming where you don't have to know exactly what order the rules are going to be executed, which means that as you change the program, you don't have to know so much about how that program works. If you need to add one more rule, you don't have to go through the whole program to see how it impacts the rest of the rules, because GeneXus will do that automatically for you. Okay. The other thing that is important in a modernization project, in my opinion, is to be able to reuse what you have. So it's very nice that we can build applications very quickly with GeneXus, but if something is already built and is running and is proven to be doing what it should, we need to be able to reuse it. And there's a couple tools. I'm going to show one of them today, which is a reverse engineering tool. And then there's another tool to import existing code into the GeneXus knowledge base to reuse it as if it was native GeneXus code. You just from after you import it, you just use it as any native program that you had already created in GeneXus. So additionally, we use what we call design systems, and design systems are basically frameworks that define the main characteristics of an application, so we don't have to be inventing the wheel every time that we create a new screen. So these design systems use wizards. And this is just an example of one of the wizards. There's a few. Some of them come included with GeneXus. Others are part of the marketplace, which is third parties, companies providing tools that you can incorporate into GeneXus. And those tools include like different design systems. This is one called K2B Tools that I'm used to using and I like, but there's others that you can also choose from. And you can see in this case, I selected I'm going to have a horizontal menu, and I change the logo. So there's my logo. And then I go to the next step, and I just select the size of things, what font I'm going to use for the titles, the columns, etc. Then I select my color scheme. In this case, it's blue, but I can change the different options one by one, or I can just use the defaults. So I can build my schema very, very quickly. You can see it here with a similar, but well, with a hidden menu instead of a shown menu. You can see at the top, there's one of those menus that hides, and you have to click on it to see it, and in green. And the other thing that we use is a very simple approach to screen definition using tree structures that are very quick to define and very easy to use, and well, just simplifies the development tremendously. So I'm going to pause the PowerPoint right now, and I'm going to actually show you what I'm talking about. I think sometimes it's easier to see what this is the GeneXus IDE environment. I just created pretty much an empty environment, and I just created one object so that I would be able to test that everything is running, and it should be running. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use our reverse engineering tool. So I mentioned before, there's many ways of application integration. You can see there's a bunch of different ways of integrating with existing systems or REST services, etc. I'm actually going to use another tool here, which is the database reverse engineering tool. And I'm going to connect to a local database, but this could be any database. It could be on, well, as long as it's available from this location. It could be DB2, iSeries, or it could be a universal database, like it could be AIX, for example, Informix, iSeries native, which would be similar, just different ways of connecting to the same data source, MySQL, Oracle, Postgres, etc. In this case, it's SQL Server. It's a local database, and the name of the database is called InStyle. And I'm just going to go to the next step, which is going to load the database tables for that system. So this is really a production system. So there's a lot of tables. There's, I don't know, maybe 400 or 500 tables, not sure. So from this, we're just going to choose one table, which is going to be the client table. Client. I probably passed it already. There it is, client. So I'm just going to select that one, and I'm going to bring it over. And I'm going to use the defaults. There are some settings here that I could change to define how that is going to be imported. But in this case, I'm just going to use all the defaults and just click the finish button. So it's just brought in. So what this process does is it creates a mapping between an external database and internal objects. So it creates, in my preferences, we didn't get into these details, but before the demo, I created an empty structure, and it creates a default, what is called a data store. That's where all my tables are stored, and here is the database definition for it. So it's called data GX16, and that's the server and the user. And in the import process, it created this data store, which is basically the database name and where it is and what's the user and the password. So, and besides that, it also brought in, it created two objects. One is my, what is called a data view, which is a mapping. So this is our internal name. This is the external name. In this case, I'm going to leave them the same, but I could modify the name internally. I can't modify the external name. That's whatever the name is. But sometimes the naming conventions used in another system are not to my liking, so I can rename them internally. And then when GeneXus accesses the database, it does that conversion on the fly. Actually, it does it when it generates programs, so there's no performance penalty or anything for that mapping. So this is my client file. So I can come here and I can modify it if I want. For example, I can say the description. This is the client number, right? So I can put it as a title, as a contextual title. And then I have my name, and I can rename this if I want. And I'm not going to do this for each of the attributes because that would take a lot of time and it'd be really boring. So I can do that kind of setup if I want to. I mean, go down the line and rename them to an internal name that it's more suitable to what I want. If the database had better descriptions or comments or anything, GeneXus would have brought them in too. So here we have patterns, which patterns are what I was trying to show in the PowerPoint, which is basically this idea of creating, let's say, a grid in this example based on a simple tree. So we are going to use these patterns. I'm going to use it for the client, in this case, customer, the same thing. So there's going to be a work with, and there's going to be a general tab. I'm not going to have a sub work with right now, but let's just a work with, which is a grid with my customers, and then a general, which is where I go and I update the customer. So let me just show you that in how it would be built. So this is the work with, right? So these are the columns. I'm going to get rid of, I'm just going to leave a few columns so it's not so wide, right? There's a lot of stuff here. That's what happens with legacy systems. They always have a lot of stuff. And I'm going to leave all the filters by default and everything else by default. And I'm going to say apply. So this will create the screens necessary to have that grid where I can update, insert, delete. I can export to Excel. I can export to a PDF. So all of that is created with this selection that I did, plus this click that I did right here. Okay. If I'm not sure how, if I'm not used to these patterns and I want to see how this would look like, I can come here and say show preview, and I can get an idea of what it's going to look like. Normally, to be honest with you, after you work with this kind of, so that's approximately what it's going to look like. And here I can change. It's going to be a responsive application, so we can check different size of screens, how it affects the look. Okay, so for the most part, during this demo, I'm not going to go back to showing the preview all the time, just because it takes time and we don't have a lot of time. Well, there's a lot of stuff that I want to show you, and I don't want to run out of time. So the second thing I'm doing here, I did the entity services. Now I'm doing my prompt. A prompt is a screen that is used throughout the system to select a value from that table or that entity. Okay, so it's a selection list. We're going to use it later, so that's why I'm creating it now. And then the last pattern that I want to use. So each one of these is called a pattern, and they have the function. Oops, didn't want to do that. Sorry. So let's close this preview. We don't want that. Okay, so we're going back to, this is the screen where we would update the product. So normally we would leave everything here, but again, it makes it kind of hard to work with so many different things. So I'm just going to leave the name, the phone number, get rid of some of this stuff, maybe leave the address there, email, and I don't even know what these are. So we're just going to leave some of this information so that we have more than just a name and a phone. But basically, we probably would have to leave them pretty much all, except if they're internal. But in this case, I'm just going to select a few so that we get an idea of how this would work. So my work is basically done. So except I have to say, I have to tell, well, I have to call this program from somewhere. So when I run it, it shows up in a menu. And I have a predefined menu here with some categories, and I want my client to be in my setup menu. So I'm going to choose, I know this WW client is the object that I need in my to show, and that's going to be what the title is. And That's all I have to do besides just clicking on that arrow to run the application. Now, in this case, we don't need to add any database structures because this client table is already there. It's already we link to it, right? If we go, let me just bring over SQL Server, and this is the database. In style is the name and tables, and somewhere here is the client table, which is hiding with, there it is. So we're linking to that table. So it's already there. We don't have to create it in this case. We're going to see probably later during this presentation an example of where we do have to create a table and what that looks like. So let's wait for GeneXus to create all of these structures for us. And also, I want to mention that towards the end of the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A. And if you have any questions, we will be answering all questions at the end. So you can start thinking about those questions now as we go through the presentation. It would be nice to be able to answer questions as we go, because sometimes they might be relevant to the specific things that we're doing, but it actually creates a much longer presentation. So in an effort to make it short, that's what we're doing. So anyway, so the client, GeneXus, says this is associated to an external table, so I'm not going to do anything with it, or I'm not going to touch it, basically because we don't want to break the other system that uses that table. And in this case, we didn't make any changes, so we wouldn't need to make any changes anyway. But if we had made changes to that client table, it would warn us and say, look, you have made changes to an external table. Those changes will not be automatically generated because, well, someone else is using that table already. That's what you said in your definition by creating that data view, and we should not be changing something that is external. That's the way that it works. So now this is actually I pre-selected a couple of options, which were Java and SQL Server to run this application. And for whatever reason, it went to my other monitor, so I'm going to bring it over here. And I also selected a checkbox that says use a login. So it creates a login and security automatically for me. That's one of the things that I said, like, these tools, these low-code tools are specialized. So we know that a lot of applications need security. So we have this security menu with all the options, users, roles. I'm not going to get into details. There's a presentation coming up about just security, and we're going to talk about that at that point. So there's our clients. This is linking to the external table, okay, which has a lot of records. From here, I can update a record if I want to. If update the table, it's completely connected to the table. I can create a report, a PDF report, automatically. Wow, all of this with a couple clicks, and then I can even export it to Excel. One of my favorite things, because it seems to be nowadays every user wants an export to Excel. So there's my export to Excel. I'm going to open it up. Of course, it's opening in my other monitor here, but you can see the information is all there. Very quick export. Nice. Okay, so that's the client. So the next thing, we're going to go back here, and we are going to create a new object, but this time from scratch. So you can see how it works when we are actually doing it from scratch. And we are going to create a new object, and the object type is transactions. So transactions in GeneXus are objects that we use to define database structures. They're similar to database definitions, but they're not exactly, and you're going to see what I mean by that very quickly. So this is going to be a sales order, and the sales order is going to have an ID, and it's going to have a date. It's going to have a customer, and my customer is from that external table, and it's going to be called this one, right? And then I'm going to also have a name. Oops, if I know how to type. I still don't know how to type. There, client name. So you can see the name is here. That's not going to be part of the sales order table. It's going to, you can see that little icon there represents that it's in another table. but we're still going to have it here so we can display it. We are going to now add another section, which is going to be like a second level, which means that there's going to be a repetition. So this is going to be the detail. So we're going to have many products with an ID also. And we're going to have a product, let's say, name or description, and a product price. And we're going to have the quantity. And we're going to have, let's say, the line amount, which is going to be a formula. So it's going to be a multiplication of the product price times the sales order detail quantity. Okay, so it's a formula. It's a global formula. It can be used anywhere. So that's going to be our detail, and then going back to the header by going in back to the first level, even though we're underneath the detail, we are going to add here the sales order total amount. And you can see that by using amount in the name, it automatically infers that the domain or the type is amount. So that's what I've been doing also. And this is going to be a sum of my other formula, which is the sales order detail amount. So we can do a formula of a formula. Now I notice here I made a mistake. The price should also be an amount. That was not automatic because I don't have the word amount in the description, so it didn't know to do that. So this is going to require 2 new tables, one for the header and one for the detail, and we're going to get to that very quickly. Before we do that, I'm just going to go to the patterns, and I'm going to apply these couple patterns, the entity services and the transaction form pattern, very quickly, so that we can see how this would work. So when we do that, we can see over on the left side that the sales order is going to open up into different options. So this is basically GeneXus generating GeneXus objects internally. So it's like GeneXus generating GeneXus, which is like when I first saw this, this was not part of the original product. It was added a long time ago, but added. And so when I saw GeneXus generating GeneXus, like my brain almost exploded. So basically, we have a sales order, and let me open this up. And here we have our entity services. And inside our entity services, we have all the objects that were generated, which are actually GeneXus objects that we don't modify directly. We just modify them through the pattern. So I'm going to take the sales order and I'm going to put it into my sales menu. And that's my sales order, so I can access it through when I execute this. So I'm going to go back to run this. So when I click on that arrow, GeneXus actually gives me a report of everything that it's doing. And it gives me it puts a checkbox or a check mark next to the objects that it needs to generate, and then it puts an equal sign next to the ones that haven't changed since the last time. So as we are developing here, of course, we're making a lot of changes, and a lot of the objects change. Like in this example, it seems like all of them changed. But as the project becomes more stable, one change, of course, doesn't affect many objects. So most of them don't change. So the time that it takes to generate, it's minimized by only generating the objects that have actually been affected by our changes. Now, remember, our changes can be global. So I can change a formula in one object that affects many objects, and GeneXus will automatically define, it internally knows what is used where. So I can go to my sales order. I can look at like the client code. I can right click and do a references, and it will show me every place where that attribute is used. It's referenced by all of these programs, and I can group them by type, which is useful in a data view, et cetera, et cetera. I go back to that, but basically, in the process of generating the application, GeneXus found that some tables are new or have changed. In this case, there's 2 new tables, the sales order and the sales order detail. And if we go down here in the report, we can see that it shows you what it's going to do. This is the code that is going to execute to create those tables. So I'm happy with my report. I see everything is okay, everything looks good, so I just click reorganize. So when I do that, GeneXus generates, in this case, I selected Java, could be other languages, could be it could be C#, it could be COBOL, RPG, whatever I selected to generate. But in this case, it's going to be Java, and it's going to generate Java programs with embedded SQL that actually are going to do this for me. If I was working in a production environment, I can export those programs and run those in my development environment and then take them over to my production environment very easily. So we're just going to wait for this to finish. We can just close this screen anyway, because it's going to continue with the next step, which is to generate this, whatever programs needs to be generated, compiled. It's going to do the whole thing for us. All we do is press one button, and then just it's even going to run it for us. So we don't have to do anything. There it is. So I'm going to close the old, so we don't have so many open windows. I'm just going to log in one more time. And in this case, we have the sales order. So it's empty. We haven't created anything. We're going to create a new order. And we're just going to assign number 1. We should have put an automatic increment. I forgot to do that. We could do an automatic date. This is my client, and this is my prompt. Remember, I mentioned the prompt. So this is my selection prompt. I could add an option here that says add new just by checking a box. In this case, I'm just going to select one of the existing programs, clients. These are my products. Normally, I would have a product table, which we're going to do next, but basically here, product number 1. Let's say we want to buy a notebook computer for $900, no, $9,900, and we need 5 of those. And then we are going to buy, I don't know, a barcode scanner for $175. We need also 5. And then we're going to, we need monitors. Monitor for $250, and we need 10 monitors. Okay, so you can see my totals calculating as soon as I enter the information, my total amount calculating also. All the formulas are getting triggered. Then the name of the customer came automatically when I enter the number. So everything is working really the way that I want it. And then I'm going to confirm it. It's going to save the header and the detail, and there's my order. I can go back to my grid, and I can see my one order. I can update it. I can delete it. I can export to Excel, etc. Reports. I'm going to add one more order here, just so that we have some information for the next step. So I'm going to do something here, which is I'm going to select a July date, and you'll see why later. Basically, I'll give you the spoiler alert, which is basically we're going to do a query, and we want to see things in different months. So let's just do item number 4. Let's say we need a printer, and the printer is $500, and we need 2, and we need phones, so that's going to be $75, and we need 5 of these. So create another order. We can see there. Oh, we can't see it there for whatever reason. Probably put the wrong order number or something. Okay, I'm going to create a new order. I probably forgot to put a number, and because I always do order number. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to put it as July. And I'm going to select a new customer, randomly selecting customers, so I don't even know which one they are. I'm going to start with 10. And this is going to be a, what do we need? Water bottle for $9.95. We need 10 water bottles. And we are going to need some paper for the printer, and we need a rim 5, whatever, and this is going to be $25 each, etc. Okay, just need some data so when we do a query, it doesn't show empty. Okay, well, oh, here's the reason why it's not showing. I had a default filter, and it was filtering for the last month, so my future orders are not showing. So I'm just going to go through the end of July. And now my orders are showing there. Okay, that's better. I didn't realize that the auto filter was making the information not show. So that's my order. So the next thing I would like to do is I would like to add a new object, which is also going to be a transaction. It's going to be the last transaction we create, and it's going to be our product transaction. And our product transaction is going to be a little different than the other ones in the sense that we already have attributes for the product. So if you can see that when I start typing, the product attributes already show up because we have the ID, the name, and we have the price. Okay. Additionally, we could add more stuff here, but for this example, I'm just going to leave it like that. We're not going to use anything else. So if I just, this is going to create some database changes, right? It's going to have to move the name and the price from the detail to the product, and we're going to do that very quickly. But before we go and execute this, besides applying the pattern like I have done before, just the default pattern, so that we can run it, I also want to do on the same before we go back to run the application, I want to show you how to create a very quickly, like a dashboard kind of screen. The reason I want to do that is because many times one of the main reasons that we modernize applications is to be able to have access to technology like displaying information in graphical way. Okay, so because that is such a common thing to do, is that I want to show you that example in particular. Okay, so we are going to just apply these patterns, and then we are going to create a query very quickly that shows us, let's say, like sales by product by month, and that's what I wanted to have, at least an order in a different month, and I'm giving away the end of the movie, but sometimes it's good to give away the end of the movie so you can understand what I'm doing as I do it. So this is the final pattern. So I mentioned before, the entity services is the one that shows that grid where I can do update, delete, export to Excel. The prompt is the one that I use in the button where I can select from a list. And the transaction form is the one where I actually do the update or the insert of the data. Okay, so before, like I said, before we go out and run it, and because we don't have so much time to go and run it and come back and all that stuff, I'm going to go and create that query that I was talking about. So I'm going to do a new object. In this case, it's going to be a reporting type query. And the query is going to be product sales, let's call it. And what I want to show here is I want to show my product name. Let's say we don't need to show the ID. It doesn't have any meaning. And I want to show my date, my sales order date. And I want to show in either the quantity or the amounts of sales. In this case, I'm just going to show quantity, but it could be the amount. Doesn't make any difference. And I'm going to make this a sum. So I'm going to add all the sales for that product, regardless of the order, by date. But the date might not be so useful. That's why I want to group it by month. Okay, I can group it by year also, but for now, just for this example, just by month. And I can add parameters, filters, orders. I'm just going to leave it simple and just do that so we can move quickly. So then I'm going to use another interesting object, which is the dashboard. And the dashboard is an object that allows me to combine different queries into one screen. And in this case, because we are not going to have time to create different queries, I'm actually going to use the same query twice so that you can see something else that I want to show you, which is that how do these queries show? In this case, for this first query that I just dropped here, it's connecting to the database, by the way, and it's going to bring me a sample of the data so that we can, oh, it's not group. I have no idea what that means. Actually, let's just remove this and let's go back to the query. And I'm just going to add a order by in case that's what it wants. So I'm going to say order by name. Usually I have an order by, so I'm assuming maybe that's what it needs. I save it, go back here. I hope this works because it's actually a fun part of my demo. No, it didn't like it. Okay. So I'm going to give it one more try by looking at this SQL statement that the query generates internally. See if I can group by F1, product name, F2, sales order date. Okay. So I'm not sure what the problem is, but it didn't like. Oh, I see. The database doesn't exist because I haven't yet. So my idea of doing it all in one step doesn't work. Okay, that's okay. We'll just leave it there and we'll come back. Do you want to save changes? No. So the database is not created yet, and that query is trying to connect to the database to show me a sample of the data. So we'll do it in 2 steps. That's fine. We're just gonna run this, and this is gonna be pretty much the last thing we're gonna show. So we might go a few minutes over the hour, if we, depending on how many questions you have. I'll stay for as long as you guys have questions. So that's okay. So let's give this a second. So what do I expect to happen now? I expect the system to tell me that there's a new table, right? The product table is new. If you remember, we just created the transaction. And then I expect it to tell me that there's a move, that the system, that GeneXus needs to move data from the detail, the order detail to the product table, because those products that existed that were created in the detail now need to be in the product table because we made that change. Okay, so this is something that happens all the time in systems where we have to move information from one table to another. This particular example would not really happen in production. Nobody would create an order without the products created first. But the idea of moving information from one table to another does happen all the time. So here's my product. It says it's going to create it from the sales order detail, and there's my order detail. And I'm just going to go a little quicker now because, well, we are kind of running out of time. So okay, so query. Okay, so we'll go back to actually running the application in a minute. We're just going to continue with our, I guess we can just take a quick peek. Where is it? There. And go to my, I even forgot to put the products in my menu because that's what happens when you're running when you're in a hurry, everything takes longer, right? So anyway, so here's my work with products. I'm going to put it in my setup menu. I'm just going to save this now, and I'm going to go back to my dashboard, which I was never able to create because I hadn't yet saved the other one. Okay, so this is going to be a dashboard for product sales. And I'm going to put my query here. It's my one query that I have. Hopefully this time it works without any problem. Yep, there it is. So it went to get the data, the table didn't exist, etc. Okay, so I'm going to put that object there again at the bottom. And in this case, I'm going to use the same one, so we don't have to create another query, but I'm going to change it to be, instead of being a pivot table or a table, in general, I'm going to make it a chart, and I'm just going to leave it as a column chart. So you kind of get an idea of what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to show the information in two different formats. It's the same information, but normally, or many times, it would be different information. Now I want to put this dashboard in a screen, and for that, I'm going to create a panel. And I'm just going to leave it as web panel 1. And this is going to be very simple. All we're going to do is we're going to put our dashboard here, and we're going to link this dashboard to the one that we just did. So the object is going to be dashboard product sales, and that's all we're going to do. And I don't want to forget the step that it's so easy to forget when you're doing this, which is to put it in a menu. So I'm going to actually put I just call it web panel 1. I didn't name it, so I'm just going to put it here. But I am going to call it here product sales. Okay, so one more time, I'm just going to click on this arrow, and that's going to bring us to the end of our demo. So before we get to the Q&A, we're gonna let's just run this application. Just take another 2 minutes and be done, and then have it open a couple of times. Oh, that's not something. Okay, so here it is going to my other monitor. Let's bring it back. We're going to log in. So I wanted just to touch on the products. So it automatically loaded all my products from the order details. That's pretty nice. Now I'm going to go to my dashboard, my product sales, and there's my pivot table at the top, and there's my graph with my bar, my chart, graphical bars. The month is showing, the months are actually horizontal, but I can come here and change it to be vertical. I can actually move things up to the top if I want to filters instead of having them as columns. So it allows you to do basically similar to an Excel pivot table. Come here, move to column, etc. So it's pretty cool. The other thing that you can do straight from here is you can export to Excel or PDF. So that's nice too. You can hide columns if you don't want them. So as I said, that basically brings us to the end of the demo. And I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, but most of the things we already talked about. This dashboard, of course, is nicer than the one I showed you. It has just more information, the same, but It allows you to use another type of data that we have that is called the cards, which are like the top piece of information. So you can display information as a card. I'm going to skip this. Unfortunately, this is actually interesting, but we don't have time, which is we do have unit testing. I do want to mention, though, that both the CEO of Apple and the CEO of Google sent a letter to President of Uruguay, congratulating them for the app, the mobile app that was built for coronavirus using GeneXus. So with, it was built by the government and other companies, third parties, but it was all built using GeneXus. So we think that that's really cool. It was actually one of the first countries to implement at a country level something like that, and we think that it's definitely because, or a lot of it is because of GeneXus. We can build progressive web applications. No time for that. Mobile applications, we mentioned them. We do have tools to work in teams with source control, source management. I mentioned it before, but from one source, we can generate to different environments, whether it's iOS, Android, Java, Windows, Unix, different databases, IBM. So we can do a lot of different platforms. Benefits, we talked about them. We're not going to talk about success stories today because we don't have time. There's my information, and I do want to offer. So basically, when we do these kind of webinars, our goal is for you to go home with a lot of information and data. But intuitively, you know that also we do webinars because we want people to buy our products. But this free consultation that I'm going to offer is absolutely free, and there's no strings attached. So it's not like you're not expected to buy anything because you accept this free consultation. So this free consultation, the way that it's going to work is you can go to this link down here, enter your information, or contact me directly through my email. You can text me or call me too. Basically, what we are going to offer is 1 to 4 hours, from 1 to minimum 1 hour for this to be meaningful, and up to 4 hours of free consultation and absolutely no strings attached. You don't have to buy anything. We're never going to ask you to buy anything. We're never going to create a proposal. We're never going to do any sales during that free consultation, because I know that people are afraid that free consultations are just not really, they're just sales pitches, but this is not. This is going to be just value. We'll work with you on a modernization project, and the end result will be an analysis of what you have to do, and that analysis is free for you to keep. And you have to share some information with us about your project, and we'll give you our feedback. And there's going to be one of our project managers and developers in that call, and that's it. So whoever wants to take advantage of this, it's invited to do that. And I would like to now open it up for questions. So if we have any questions. So Drew is asking, is it possible to allow end users to create their own reports somehow, similar to Crystal reports or something like that? So in some ways, yes, but not the way that Crystal reports works. There is a tool for end users that allows you to do. It's an add-on to GeneXus that you can use to create ad hoc queries. What you can do, and it many times is what you need to do, is create queries that the user can then modify, and that you can do. There's a report editor that allows you to change the way that reports are printed. So they cannot add new information, but they can remove anything they don't want, and they can move it around the way that and make it look the way that they want. Also, when you create pivot tables like the ones I showed, if you include all the information they need, they're able to remove the information they don't need. And if you create a good result set for them, they can probably get the information they need from that. You showed web apps. Does this also apply to mobile? So yes, we could take this application and configure it for mobile, and we could use most of the same code for mobile in two different ways. We could create a progressive web application, and we would just have to go through some of the screens to make sure that they look nice. They will all work, but we want to make sure that they look nice. So we would probably want to go through and see that we're displaying. We would select what information shows for each size application. And we can also create a native iOS or a native Android application. We generate Swift for iOS and Java for Android. And those are 100% native applications that you have to add to the stores. And yes, you can definitely do that. So that's something that we will have a presentation in the next few weeks that is going to be mobile centered. And we're going to show how to create an application basically that is mobile, starting from a web application. So we have to use K2B for better and faster developments. Nabil, that is a choice. I have been programming with GeneXus for about 20 years, and I find it to be the fastest way for me to develop applications, to use K2B tools. It's not the only way. Not everybody uses it. I mean, to me, yes, it does make improves. The biggest improvement I see is that the user interface is better. So a lot of the things we didn't show have to do with like filters and sorting and column filters and stuff that are very easy to do with a tool like K2B tools that are not necessarily as easy to do without it. So, but it's I would say as many people use K2B tools as people, I mean, more people don't use K2B tools than people use K2B tools in the GeneXus development. So, so it's a choice. It's my choice, so I use it, but not everybody will choose that. Does GeneXus have runtime? No, GeneXus does not have a runtime. GeneXus generates native code for all platforms. So it generates Java, which is open source. It generates C#, which is a Microsoft defined language. It generates COBOL and RPG, which are IBM mostly supported languages. But they're all native languages. They don't require any runtimes. So your application is yours forever, and you can run it in any environment. We do have one-click deployments to cloud for AWS and Microsoft and Google and IBM, but you can also deploy, just copy your deployment, use our deployment tools. There's some great deployment tools that we have to deploy it in pretty much any environment. So there's no runtime. Do we have any other questions? So approximately how many months needed to learn K2B tools and to be professional? I don't know if you're asking how long to learn K2B tools or how long to learn GeneXus. So GeneXus is, I think, relatively easy to learn. You will learn it in a few weeks, and then K2B tools, I would say you start using it right away. You become in a couple of weeks, you understand pretty much how to do everything, and then it takes another couple of weeks to be proficient, and then it takes you forever to completely learn a tool because it's always changing and improving. So I hope I answered your question, but a couple of weeks to where you feel comfortable and productive, maybe less even. A couple of weeks.
Sergio, I think that was the last question.
Great.
Good. Thank you, Sergio, a lot for the excellent presentation. And thank you, everyone, for your participation and as well for your questions. There you have Sergio's contact details. So please feel free to contact Sergio, as he mentioned in his presentation. Just as a final reminder, the recording of this webinar will be available on the GeneXus webinar site and on our YouTube channel. So always remember to go to our GeneXus webinar site to check the previous webinars and to sign up for the upcoming ones. Remember, everything is free and 100% online. And we hope to see you again next time. Please be safe. Bye-bye.